All right, welcome to WASA Distance Education. This is NBV3E, grade 11 Native Studies, and the course is Beliefs, Values, and Aspirations of Aboriginal Peoples in Contemporary Society. I'm Pete, and I'm your teacher. So welcome to week 3, and this is class number 3. So we're winding down week 3 here. We're going to finish off lesson 7, which we started last night, and we were talking about stereotypes, and we sort of started to explore the different types of stereotypes, and we understand, we sort of reviewed the idea of stereotype, or the definition, which is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. So it's not to say that typically stereotypes are wrong, but it's not to say that they're completely, everything they say is completely inaccurate, but just typically it's an offensively oversimplified, right? You can't just reduce an entire people, an entire nation, an entire race, an entire religion, an entire anything into just one set of ideas, right? You just can't. People are individuals. Okay. So we took a look we started to look in the text about for ideas on what types of stereotyping there is, and we also had some ideas for what we could do to counteract stereotyping. Okay, and some of the problems with stereotyping. One of the other things that we looked at yesterday was the idea that stereotyping kind of ties into your identity, right? If everything you see around you portrays you or your people or your your nation in a certain way, right? It's really hard to counteract that, right? And I use the example, and I use this quite a bit, the positive use of that, where if you're kind of a middle of the road student and you want to get to be a better student, you hang around students that are better than you, that are better academically, and pretty soon you'll be kind of boosted up, right? But that's a positive way of using that. But if you're hanging around people that kind of look at you as a stereotype, or if you're hanging around stereotypes, then that can be a negative thing. Now, something has kind of come up in the news, and I think I mentioned it yesterday. It's called the Ridiculous Six. And now I'm going to show this story, and I will warn you, we're talking about stereotypes, and we're talking about negative stereotypes. So, I want to be sensitive about this topic, but I think it's important for us to see a real example of negative stereotypes and of Aboriginal people actually doing something about it. They're really doing, I think, a really good job of communicating their concerns about it. But in the discussion of what the issues are, it is offensive, and you may be offended. So please keep in mind that we're doing this to learn some things here. All right, so yeah, so please keep that in mind. So this is from CBC News, okay, and it's about an Adam Sandler movie called The Ridiculous Six. Now, we know that comedy, this is a comedy, a farce, it's one of those kind of low-brow kind of comedies, and we've seen them, other types of movies that, that they make where they're, where they're kind of just making fun of everybody, right? And the issue here is that they really disrespected Aboriginal culture. That's what they're saying. Now, notice that it says here, Native activists tell Adam Sandler, Netflix, and then hashtag not your Hollywood Indian. Now, keeping in mind these are, I believe these are Americans, and they refer themselves as Indians. Um, so that's why they're using that. And I think maybe that they're using it also to communicate with the people who are making the movie. Okay. So what they're doing then is they're reaching out on Twitter, and I guess Facebook, you can use hashtags as well, and they're trying to actually have the movie canceled. Okay, now these started with the actors that were working on the movie. So let's see what it says here. Okay, it says 8 native actors and a cultural advisor. Now this is really important here because it's not just the actors. They actually had a cultural advisor on the set. Okay, which is a common kind of thing. But here's the thing that is really strange. If the cultural advisor was offended, that should be a clue to the people who are making the movie that there's something wrong. Okay, so 8 native actors and a cultural advisor walked off the production of the Adam Sandler comedy The Ridiculous Six last week, saying the script was insulting to Native women and to elders. Okay, so this is what happened. The actor, and he's shown here, and he said that today work was no bueno, so no no good in Spanish, kind of funny. My native women were disrespected, and they walked off set. So there you go. So he's taking a stand, and he's an actor, so maybe he's taking a chance with his acting career, isn't he? He's taking a chance by saying, I'm not going to act in a movie where people are being disrespected. It's a comedy, and what he's saying is that you can't really, um, you still can't do certain things. And then it says most of the actors who left the film set were from the Navajo Nation. They were playing Apache warriors, women and elders of the Adam Sandler comedy Western. The first of 4 movies Sandler agreed to produce for Netflix. So this is not a major movie studio. And I wonder if that has something to do with it. The fact that, it's a kind of a internet movie company, fairly new. And I wonder if it's they just don't have their cultural sensitivity tuned high enough. But there's some interesting questions or some interesting comments from the producers. Now this part is offensive. It really is, and so I'm going to put it up there if you watch it on the YouTube or whatever. I'm not going to read it because it really is very offensive stuff. But basically, it puts the female Aboriginal actors in a situation that really is kind of humiliating and degrading. To me, anyway. And it's not funny. That's the other thing, right? If you could say, well, if it's funny, maybe it's worth it for a laugh, but it's not. It's not. It's not even funny. So the actors were concerned about it, and here's the thing. It's yeah, and so there was some unpleasant stuff with a peace pipe, and right. So it's intended to be lowbrow comedy, but there's a low point, isn't there? Okay. Now here's the thing. So what did the actors do? They didn't immediately go to Twitter. Okay, they expressed their um, concern about it. Well, first they walked off set, and then they confronted the producers of it. Okay, and they actually have um, the video of it, so you can watch it. You can go onto the CBC website and watch that conversation. But here's what the producer said. Okay, and this is really telling about how he sees the Aboriginal actors in the movie. To me, anyway. What he says is one of the producers. He says if you're overly sensitive about it, you shouldn't be in the movie. Okay. And then it says we don't want to offend anyone. Well, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Those two things don't go together, right? On the one hand, he's saying you're being overly sensitive, and then on the other hand, he's saying we don't want to offend anyone. Well, he's offended his actors, his Aboriginal actors, hasn't he? Right? So what he's basically saying is the fact that they're offended doesn't mean that it's offensive. It means that they're overly sensitive. It's a rather paternalistic approach, in my mind, anyway. Okay. So what are they doing then? So they walked off the set. Okay. They talked to the producer about it, who's the kind of the boss of the movie. Okay. And he really didn't give them a very satisfactory answer. In fact, quite an insulting answer to the actors. So then they did this. It said, as news of the walkout spread, Red Shirt Shaw, so that's one of the actors, began posting about it on Twitter under the hashtag #NotYourHollywoodIndian, which was inspired by some of the actors' comments. Okay, so you could actually go to Twitter and you could follow that conversation and see where it's going. Okay, and people are now they're posting pictures, and there you go, right? So this is activism. It's sort of a grassroots activism. Now, you're not going to see this type of activism in the course text because this was written before we had Twitter, probably before we had really widespread internet as well. Okay, but here's the thing about it, right? The quote is, I logged into social media and saw that a ton of people were talking about it, but that the ideas weren't consolidated, so I tried to push it out there. Okay, now that's another example. When yesterday I was talking about how to counteract stereotypes. So one of the ways is to have a conversation, right? Is to fight misinformation with correct information. Okay. And another way of having that conversation is to kind of focus the conversation, because if one voice or a united voice is more likely to be heard, right? So they're using the same hashtag and they're kind of having the same complaint, right? They're not making a bunch of different complaints. The other thing that this person did was she founded a petition on change.org. Okay. Now she's asking Netflix to cancel the production of The Ridiculous Six. So that's an interesting approach, because the question I would ask is, why not just ask them for changes? Right now, it may be that the insensitivity of the producer was just so overwhelming that they didn't see any possibility of saving it, right? But this is what they're asking Netflix to do. Maybe Netflix would, if they were smart, they would listen to the cultural advisor. What parts of it are being offensive, and how can we change it so it's still funny, but it's not offensive to Aboriginal people? Because let's face it, even if they find some replacement actors, right, and film the scenes, Aboriginal people aren't going to watch it. People that care about Aboriginal people aren't going to watch it. So, they're really reducing their audience when they do stuff like that. Okay. And it is possible to make a movie that kind of plays on some, stereotypes, but not in a insulting way, right? It is possible to do it, and there have been some pretty funny movies that did that, I think, anyway, and they certainly weren't as offensive, And I guess it is, a lot of it depends on our worldview. But to me, just reading those lines of the script, it was just so clear that they had missed the mark there. It wasn't even close. So, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, because it fits very well with our conversation about stereotypes, both our conversation about stereotypes, because these are 8 actors who said, no, we're not going to participate in this because it's perpetuating stereotypes, very negative stereotypes, and it's not funny. Right? So, but they went further than that, and the next step was, okay, we're going to address this. We're going to get it out on social media. We're going to contact the news media, and we're going to explain to people why we found this offensive. Right? It disrespects our culture. It disrespects our women. Right? And it was important to them, important enough for them to just quit the movie. Right? And now you see Netflix again. You see, it released a statement about the walkout and the Ridiculous Six, saying it is a broad satire of Western movies and the stereotypes types they popularized, featuring a diverse cast that is not only part of but in on the joke. Okay, so that would be great if indeed everyone was in on the joke. Okay, but this is the problem. And this is um, the the people who are in some of the people who are in the movie don't find it funny. They don't find the offensive material, part of it that's offensive to their culture. They don't find that funny, so they're not in on the joke. And so imagine whoever wrote that at Netflix, some executive or some public relations persons wrote that without really realizing that they are actually making the point of the actors, right? They're making the point in saying that everyone involved in this production is completely insensitive to the concerns of the Aboriginal actors in the film. Completely, it's totally insensitive, because what they're saying is that these people aren't in on the joke. Well, no, because it's offensive. Write a different joke that's not offensive. So this shows, I think, why the activists are asking the film be simply canceled, because it just everyone involved seems to be so determined that it's not them, it's the Aboriginal actors. Okay, so this is a great example, and I don't know how this is going to end. It'll be interesting to follow, and we have a few weeks left of the course, so hopefully we'll get some information about it. But this is the way to counteract negative stereotypes. Okay, it doesn't have to be really organized, right? It didn't start organized; it just organized itself because everyone who was like-minded, found this hashtag. Okay, and it has a very clear goal. Their goal is to stop the movie. Okay, and that's admirable to me anyway. It's admirable, and it's a good example of how we can all fight negative stereotypes. Right now, we have to be ready to call people out when they have negative stereotypes. We have to be ready to say no, right? And and sometimes that's hard. Right? The easy thing is just to be quiet and not say anything. But letting things go like that is the way these stereotypes get perpetuated. So that's in the media. That's happening right now. And again, I want to apologize. I showed you that little bit. I didn't read it, but I did show you that little bit of the offensive dialogue. You can go on to CBC if you want to read it. It's really bad. And there's no comedy value at all. And even if there was, it's certainly disrespectful. So it's about 10 lines of the movie. They could certainly have hired someone to write some funny jokes. And there's some Aboriginal comedians who could probably write some funny jokes that would fit with the movie and then not be offensive. But in order to understand that you have a problem, you have to, in order to solve a problem, you have to understand that you have it. And it seems that the producers of the movie and Netflix don't understand it. So now, of course, what's going to happen when we read the comments, right? Okay, there's some supportive comments, okay? But certainly going to be, some. Yeah, well, it is nice to see some of the comments. I'm a little concerned of showing these comments because I really haven't looked at them. And sometimes on CBC, there's quite a bit of um, negative, just people that get on there and are bigoted and stupid. Okay, so that's what's on the news, and so there's a link. If you try and find, if you can't find it on CBC and you want to find it, I'll put the link on my Facebook page, PW Wasa. Okay. So we yesterday we were looking at the text, and we were actually looking at stereotypes in the media, and I think we've seen a great example of it. People criticized Avatar for its overly simplistic depiction of Aboriginal people. I was trying to defend it a little bit in the sense that it was, they were really hitting people over the head with an idea that is obvious to us, and so it made it seem rather over the top. And I think it's because they were making it for a worldwide audience. But that's a different kind of error than, going out and just being offensive and being completely ignorant to everyone that tries to tell you you're being offensive. And I don't think the makers of Avatar were really trying to be offensive, or really felt that were being offensive. They just overdid things in the interest of trying to tell a story, sort of unambiguously. But still, people walk away from a movie like that with a certain worldview that's influenced by the movie, right? Not necessarily by reality. Okay. We also talked yesterday about how kind of um, the victors, or the dominant culture in any kind of conflict, ends up writing the books. And so there were a lot of books in the historical accounts written that were inaccurate. I talked about the fact that um, when people are in a conflict and they do things, they will then, the historians and the writers will try to justify those actions. And sometimes that justification, involves vilifying their opponents, okay, unjustly. And of course, the opponents don't really get to write about it. Okay, so Aboriginal people were really, treated very, very poorly in a lot of cases in after contact. But that poor treatment was portrayed falsely, sort of in a light of, they had no choice, or they were, the Europeans were defending themselves, or whatever. You get the idea. Okay. Now, right at the bottom of page 133 of the course text, it says the impact of these representations is negative. Okay, and these are just sort of false, oversimplistic representations in the media, but there are some ways to combat the stereotypes. So we talked about Twitter and hashtags and Facebook pages, writing letters to the media, right? Writing, making a video and putting it on YouTube. We talked about that, and those are all things that didn't exist when they wrote this book, or they really didn't talk about that in the book. Okay. So, we can talk about the mainstream media. It's really important that information presented in the media be accurate. Okay, and I know personally, I read the news every day. I read CBC every day, because I consider it important. And a lot of times I will sort of gravitate towards the stories about Aboriginal, um, of concerned Aboriginals, or concerns of people in the North, because I live in the North, and I'm all in. I mean, I live here, I have a house, and so these things do affect me. And so when I see inaccurate information, I will maybe make a comment, maybe send a little note to the editor. And all of that stuff makes a difference. Now, they may not write you back and say, oh, we got it wrong. Or if you make a comment in the comment section, you may get a lot of pushback from other people, accusing you of all sorts of things. But that's okay, because for everybody that types something negative, there'll be a lot of people that read it and go, oh, okay, well, that's the counter argument to what the wrong information that I read in the article, or the wrong information that I read in the comments. Okay, so that's a simple thing, and it doesn't have to take a long time, right? You don't have to, you pick your battles kind of thing. I tend to gravitate towards things that I know quite a bit about, and and so education issues and stuff like that. And so that's one way of doing it, right? When you see something on television that's inaccurate, there's always, you can go on the TV channel's website. If you see something on the web, they usually have a place to report errors or to contact the editor. And again, they don't always respond. Sometimes they do. They don't always respond, but if they get enough of that feedback, they will understand that they've made a mistake. And I believe that they're usually pretty sincere. Most of the mainstream media outlets are pretty sincere about being correct and accurate. There are some outlets that have a reputation for being biased, and I don't really know, but again, maybe that's a stereotype. They have a reputation for being biased, but maybe if enough people contact them and correct misinformation, they'll get tired of being called out on misinformation. So it says here, historically, the media has relied on skewed images of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples and the issues that affect them. Now, I talked yesterday, about Saskatchewan First Nation. I lived there for 4 years. I taught there, and so they're in the news. They're in the news because because why? Well, because they were all evacuated. So and the news just really talks about the evacuation. They very rarely actually explain what the problem is, which has nothing to do with the community, right? The problem has to do with the engineering of the way where the community was put, chosen, and the engineering of the dike that surrounds the community. So really it has nothing to do with the community, but yet they keep talking about the community rather than talking about the failures that have led to the almost yearly evacuation. Okay, so that's what we say. This is a skewed image. Now, the reason that happens, I'm convinced it's not necessarily deliberate. Let me try and get my lines sorted out here. See if I can do this. Okay, another few months of using a smartboard and I'll get it. So it says here the mainstream media. Well, yeah, okay, I did a great job of making that line thicker, didn't I? All right, let's see if I can. All right, we'll try it. We'll try it. Okay, pen. It seems to have stuck in there. No, I don't. Okay, I don't really know. It says here, the mainstream media represents a mainstream audience, writing and broadcasting stories and opinions that target the audience. So crises always get attention, right? And when the media adds bias and sensationalism to this fact, it perpetuates some negative stereotypes of Aboriginal people. Okay? So did I, when I was evacuated, I was evacuated. So we get off the plane in Stratford, Ontario, and there's a news media there, right? And they were trying to take pictures. And, I was feeling pretty haggard. I was feeling tired and stressed because we'd been waiting because the weather had been bad. We'd been waiting for a couple of days and kind of stressful. And it was a long trip, and it was a large plane, very uncomfortable. And so there was the media waiting to try and take our pictures as we're getting off the plane. I thought it was terribly unfair, not giving anyone a chance to kind of freshen up or anything like that. But there you go, right? The media is there, and that's the type of photos they want to show people, people looking stressed and haggard. when they get off the plane. Okay. So, but it does perpetuate the negative stereotypes. Okay. And of course, it has to, uh, you know, when people read this because they trust the news and they trust the news media, they're going to develop an inaccurate picture of uh, what First Nation people are like. So, and they actually say this, and this is sort of a common theme in the course text. The negative stereotypes have an impact not just on the audience, but on the people that the stereotype is being perpetuated on. Okay, so I told you my story about getting frisked when I was out in New Brunswick by a police officer. Cause I look like maybe I look like a bit of a hippie or something like that, and he was pretty sure he had some sort of drug addict. When he saw me, the police officer, and in fact, I'm a straight-laced guy. You don't do anything, but I live a very healthy life, but that's the stereotype that police officer had, right? So, so it affects me. It affects me if people have a negative stereotype of me, right? And, again, fortunately, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't affect my everyday life, but, it certainly it's always in the back of my mind. I saw a police officer tonight, and I have nothing against police officers at all, but actually, that I got a little bit nervous. It was like, ooh, is he gonna think is he gonna think I'm homeless or something, right? But of course not, right? But that incident really affected me. So now it goes on here. It says, Cayuga actor Gary Farmer says that negative portrayals in the many media make it hard for Aboriginal youth to have positive self-images. Susan Swan, who's an Ojibwe from Lake Manitoba First Nation, says that First Nations youth she talks to in communities have the impression from media that most other Aboriginal youth are in gangs, but in fact only about 3% are in gangs. Okay, so there is another important concept, right? If you think that everyone else is doing something because it's a stereotype in the media, it makes it kind of hard sometimes um, to understand that's not really the case. Okay. Now, so there we are. So they talk about combating stereotypes, and really, this is they're going to talk about some ideas, ideas that perhaps I haven't mentioned, because they're not really going to talk so much about Twitter and stuff like that. Well, they're going to talk about internet media, but that's really one of the major ways that we communicate nowadays. So one solution to the problem of stereotypes in the media may be greater inclusion of Aboriginal people in producing major television, radio, news, and internet services. Right. So this is, going back to the Adam Sandler movie, they had a cultural advisor on the movie, but they didn't listen to that person. What if the director had been Aboriginal? What if the producer had been Aboriginal? What if the director of photography had been Aboriginal? Any one of those people could have, the director of photography could have turned off his or her camera and said, "No, I'm not doing this." Or an Aboriginal producer would have read the script and crossed out those lines and said, write something funny and that's not offensive to me, right? So this is a big thing, is inclusion in the mainstream media, right? So of course, right? So and what Maureen Gugu Mimqua, journalist, so what she says is, let's see if I got Mi'kmaq journalist. Mi'kmaq. Okay. If I got that wrong, if you know and you're watching this on the archive, just if you're watching on YouTube, just put a little comment below with the pronunciation. These days, more mainstream news media outlets are beginning to realize the importance of having a more diverse workforce working in their newsrooms. Canadian cities are becoming more diverse, and media outlets in print and broadcast are recognizing the need to attract readers, listeners, and viewers from those diverse communities. Right? So that makes sense, right? If you had a choice of watching a news program, right, and there was an Aboriginal person on a news program that kind of understood the issues that you were facing and sort of understood your culture better than someone, maybe you would tend to watch that news broadcast more, right? And then she goes on to say, but for me, diversity in newsrooms needs to mean more than just hiring people of color to cover mainstream issues. Diversity also means providing coverage that is reflective of issues and events important to those diverse communities. And the coverage needs to increase and be consistent. Only then will diversity be meaningful in mainstream newsrooms. Now, now there is a risk to this, and we when we say we talk about the Adam Sandler comedy and that, but sometimes comedy and parody can actually be a powerful tool for learning and for social change. So when I think about comedy, the Daily Show. So this Jon Stewart has this show called The Daily Show, and he's actually made fun a couple of times of the tendency for mainstream news to, if they have an issue concerning African Americans, that they put an African American there to report on it. Or if they have an issue concerning women, then they'll put a woman there to talk about it. And he's made fun of that a few times by having doing these little comedy sketches. So the risk is that if a mainstream media gets an Aboriginal person on their staff, that basically they're going to be every thing that they do is going to be about Aboriginal issues, right? And that's a risk too, because we want to hear, I want to hear what an Aboriginal person thinks about the federal budget, right? Not just what they think about the evacuation in cash, especially if they're Ojibwe, right? It doesn't, it's not as really all that relevant. But I want to hear what they think about, about you know just regular national issues. Okay, it doesn't mean that's all I want to hear. It's another voice. It's a voice that's important, and it's a major. Aboriginal people are a major part of Canada, but yet we very, very seldom hear them on the national news, okay, or in national media. Now, the other way that this works, and is that there are Aboriginal networks, right? The APTN, which has some great shows on it, right? Aboriginal Voices Radio, I'm not as familiar with that, but certainly I've been on. We used to go at the previous place I worked was we would go on the radio and talk about our programs and programming, right? And actually in Wassa we do go on the radio and talk about our programs and programming as well. So, that's a way, right? Turtle Island News, they talk about that. Wind Speaker. There's of course the Sioux Bulletin. Well, that's more Sioux Lookout, but they do talk about a lot of Aboriginal things. Wawate News. So there are quite a few media opportunities. Now the risk there, or my concern there, is that APTN really is watched by Aboriginal people and a few non-Aboriginals, right? So it's almost like it's not as mainstream, right? Typical Canadian Toronto person going to sit down and they're not going to turn on APTN. They're going to turn on whatever, CBC, CTV, the national, right? So what we need is Aboriginal Canadians on those networks, okay? So that when people turn on any news show, they're going to see, in addition to, they're going to just see an actual representation of the broad range of Canadians. Okay. So there you go. So that was one, and then of course there's there's the arts. Okay? And, one of the nicest gifts I got when I was working on the James Bay Coast when I left, they gave me a book called Stories of the Cree. And, in the first chapter, we talked about stories in that oral tradition. And really, I think this is the author's way of doing that. He was telling these relatively short stories that were about a page or 2 pages from his past, from his growing up on the James Bay Coast, and really just showing snapshots of his life and his upbringing in a very positive way. It was really, really a very nice book. Okay, so, and that's the sort of thing that would really help. It would help anybody, because anybody could pick those up and read them and really get something out of it and really start to understand the culture that the author was where he forms his worldview. Okay. And and then there are singers as well, and I'm familiar with Cheyenne Havorka, and because she's made some albums, and she actually came to our school one time and sang for us. It was great. So, and so she has something to say. So we here, and this is on the top of page. Should be on the top of page 35, telling her own stories. So it says there are many contemporary authors, artists, filmmakers, and historians who recognize the inaccuracies and stereotypes in the media. So those are the things we're trying to combat, right? Many are First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, and they work to tell their own stories. In other words, to share authentic stories and accurate information with their audiences. And the artists whom you'll read about on page 124 to 129 are examples of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people expressing their identities. Okay, so there you go. So what do we have so far? Okay, we have, you make a YouTube video. You can tweet on Twitter, right? You can have a blog. You can take photos and post them on Flickr, right? You can sing. You can make films. You can make art. Okay, so somewhere in that range of things that just said, there's something you can do. Okay, there's something you can do. Okay, so I don't make films, right? I make little YouTube videos, but I really don't have the skills to make a YouTube video about, say, Aboriginal culture or even really life in the North. But I have enough skills to take photos. And so I take lots and lots and lots of photos and I put them up on Flickr. And basically the photos are of wildlife and of the cool things that I see in the North. Okay? And it's always, always, always a positive message to counteract so many negative messages. Okay, so when I go out and I go visit a community, I take lots of pictures, and these are always pictures of all the great stuff that I see up there. Okay, so that's what I do. That's what I'm able to do, right? And I've told you that sometimes I go and I when I see something in the media that is not correct, I will write to the editor or I'll write in the comment section, and I'll push back on it. Okay, so that's what I can do. Now, some people can sing. Some people can write songs, some people can make movies, right? We're not saying that everyone has to do all of this. We're just saying these are some ideas, right? Some people can go on APTN, some people can go on the radio. Somebody might aspire to be a journalist and actually get a position at one of the major broadcasters, okay? So, and that would certainly help. Okay. So this is what they're saying. So you can read these. You can read these pages, and again, I will put these on my Facebook page, where they talk about the different artists. Okay. And I think on the next page there's an example of some poetry. Okay. And I'll let you read that. I have a feeling I might mangle that poetry. Well, there you go. Right there's a cultural. The poetry I learned as a young child is all European poetry, and um, I guess so European descendant poetry. Um, all right. Okay. Now, oh yes, the sport logo controversy, and that's been in the news quite a bit lately. Um, so we talk about sports logos, where they, sports teams have adopted kind of offensive stereotypes as their mascots and as their team names. Okay, so yeah, those have been in the news. I don't think we really need to um, hash those out because some of those are pretty offensive. There have been attempts to ban some of these, but again, it's just that cultural insensitivity on the part of owners and even some of the fans of these teams is, we've always been called this, and yes, we recognize it offends people, but we're gonna still use it. Yeah, it does not make a lot of sense. Okay, you can read this. Okay. And yeah, and then there's some information about some of the contributions, right? And that's where that, having a little bit of knowledge about some of the contributions that First Nations people have made really, can counteract some negative stereotypes. Okay, I played lacrosse. It was really fun. Played it growing up. Not particularly good at it, but I certainly played it. Okay. And yeah, so there's quite a bit of positive, right? Sharing positive accomplishments and achievements of Aboriginal people is again a way to sort of counteract some of the negative stereotypes. And yeah, and then that's it for this material. So let's go back to the course material, and this is going to be page. I think it's page 10 of Unit 2. Uh, and they have let's see here. Oops, I think yep, we're good here. This page, okay, that was page 9. Okay, so they have some information. This just, what's in the course text is just a condensed version of what's in the textbook, but really you should read the textbook. It really has a lot more information in it. So now for support question number 1, um, you're being asked to assess various forms of media, so such as newspapers, magazines, journals, radios, films, websites. Of course, they say internet on here, but really, it's websites. Websites. Okay. For examples of the stereotypical portrayal of First Nations, so you could, for example, that article, if you don't mind some of the offensive stuff that was in it on CBC, you could look at that and talk about that if you want. But basically, it says, well, what I wrote down to think about that is how do the articles about First Nations people portray them? You could look at articles about Saskatchewan or articles. What do the comments on those articles say? So another First Nations person that was in the news around our area recently was Darlene Necan. Darlene, Darlene Necan. Now, I tried to get some links to the various articles. Unfortunately, the main article, CBC, when I checked it, wasn't working. It just had a title, and it didn't actually have the text of the article or any of the comments. But if you poke around, there is quite a bit of information about her. And what I'm sort of interested to, if you want to look at this, not only what the news media was saying about her, because I think that for the most part they were pretty positive about it. They presented her in a very sympathetic way. Okay, and we talk about the point of view and the agenda of the authors, But the comments about her, there were quite some pretty mean things and very untrue things about her. So, it's worth looking at that to see and maybe ask yourself, how could you, now that you understand maybe some of the ways to push back against these negative stereotypes and this negative um, portrayal of people, what are some of the ways you could have pushed back against that? Could you have, right? I'm not saying that we have to, take up every single cause or case, but just, when it's appropriate, you may be able to counteract some of the negativity. Okay. So that's the support question. And if you want some other links, I can try and get you some other links, but I would just Google her name if you want to look at her story. Kind of a very very interesting story. Okay. And we excuse me, we talked about ways to dispel racism and discrimination, right? Let me tell you, when I went to university, there there were people from every possible race and religion and culture you could possibly imagine in my class. Okay? And the thing is that nobody cared. I mean, I had people who worked with me in my group assignments who literally didn't speak English. I mean, literally they didn't speak English. We got along fine, and we got really good marks, right? And nobody cared. Nobody cared where we were from or what languages we spoke or what we looked like. So there's another kind of, if you're looking at getting away from racism and stereotypes, the further you get in your education, the less it matters. Because people start looking at not where you're from, but what you can do, right? And so that is something, and this is one of the reasons I value education, because it really is a great equalizer. Once you get to, once you get to a certain point, nobody cares. Okay. Yeah. All right. I think we could probably wrap this up. The key questions for lesson 7. So take a look at those. We could probably maybe review them if we have a little bit of time tomorrow. So we'll come back tomorrow. We'll start lesson 8. And remember that Thursday will be our last class of the week. We don't meet Friday. So thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow.